Hello, welcome to Avast Hacker Archives, a new series that uncovers the aha moments that hackers and researchers have had over the course of their careers. I'm Jaya Baloo, CISO at Avast, and this is our final episode for Season 1. We wanted to wrap up the first chapter of this series with a bang and invited Keren Elazari to join us today. I'm super excited about this because Keren is an internationally recognized security analyst, researcher, author, and speaker working with leading cybersecurity firms all over the planet, government organizations, as well as Fortune 500 companies. And as an independent voice on cybersecurity, Keren Elazari is also the first Israeli woman to give a TED Talk at the official TED conference. Her talk about hackers has been viewed by millions. It's been translated to over 30 languages, and it's one of the most watched talks on TED.com on the topic of cybersecurity. She's also the founder of B-Sides Tel Aviv, Israel's largest security community event, and the founder of the leading cybersecurity ladies network for women in cybersecurity. Not to mention being a faculty member at IDC Herzliya, as well as a researcher at Tel Aviv University. How she finds the time to be so awesome, I don't know, but I am super appreciative that you're joining us today. Thank you, Keren.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege and a pleasure. I'm so excited to be with you. And thank you for having me for the season finale of your podcast, of your exciting show. It's fun for me. And I find time for everything because I work in the most interesting field in the world, cybersecurity. I've been doing this since I was 14 and I've not been bored for a single day. So that's how I find time for everything.
And I love your enthusiasm and your positivity. It's just always been such a pleasure to talk to you and to be with you. But, I've always wondered, where did you get your start? I mean, how did you get excited and into this field?
So my story has a couple of elements to it. One of that is that natural born curiosity. I was a very, very curious little girl. My parents have so many stories about me getting into trouble, crawling under tables, climbing up trees, finding things I shouldn't find, touching things all over, taking things apart. Definitely technology and gadgets and toys, anything that we had in the home, I would play with. And I was very lucky to have access to both, Barbie dolls and My Little Ponies, but also robots and gadgets. And my dad, who is an electrical engineer, always had all kinds of electrical projects around the house, which sounds not the safest thing to have with a little curious girl. But I find that it was definitely part of my technological education, just to feel really comfortable with having pieces of gadgets lying around the house. And he was also the early adopter for any new technology, which was lucky for me because I got to get the legacy devices. So if he got a new phone or a new PDA, if you remember those, personal digital assistant.
I used to have a Palm Pilot.
That's, so he had like 5 different models of them. And we had fax machines and all kinds of things. And I just got to play with them. And my mom worked for an airline. So I got to visit her office and I got to see the first terminal computers that were connected to the airline network. So this was in the 80s, way before the internet, at least from my perspective as a child growing up in Israel. I got to see networked computers and I got to understand their language a little bit. My mom would teach me airline codes and airport codes, just as like a quiz game, like a memory game.
Yeah.
And for me, it was part about learning that language that she would have to use on her airline terminal computer. So that's the natural kind of background that I have come from. But then Hollywood stepped in. And in 1995, I saw a movie that changed my life. I got the soundtrack right here. It's Hackers from 1995. This movie changed my life in so many ways. I saw it as a kid, very impressionable, 14-year-old girl. And I realized that everything that I was into and that I was excited about, that I was passionate about, it's called being a hacker. And Angelina Jolie can do it. So I could do it too. If you look at the cast, it's just incredible. Yeah. I found it at the time, and I think even today, to be quite diverse and inclusive. And for me, it was really meaningful because I didn't meet or know any real world hackers. This is how hackers look to me. That's what Hollywood told me. And I just believed that story. I was inspired by that story. And I said, aha, this is what I am. I'm a hacker because I like all of these curious things. I like taking apart hardware and I like exploring the internet we first got access to the internet in Israel when I was maybe 12 or 13. So just a couple of years before this movie. And I was exploring the internet without realizing that a lot of my activities were actually hacking. Nobody told me it's hacking. Nobody told me it's potentially criminal or dangerous. In fact, we did not have a computer crime law in Israel. So at least from that perspective, it wasn't criminal. Of course, the internet is global, so the bigger picture should apply here. But I was just being very curious and exploratory, and sometimes finding my way on other people's computers or servers, or bypassing password protections on forums. If you remember, it still actually exists in a lot of places, but there was this really popular software written in PHP to run bulletin board systems, not BBSs, but forums, like web forums. And it had a lot of vulnerabilities, still has a lot of vulnerabilities. And I was just learning how to use some of those just to get into the hidden parts or the password protected parts of the site. And I didn't know this was really hacking. I was just a script kiddie. I was copying scripts that I found from other kids, mostly on IRC, Internet Relay Chat.
Of course, gosh, yes.
That's where I learned IRC. English.
Yeah.
I learned how to type English there.
What's your handle on IRC?
So, of course, once I saw hackers, my handle was Acid Burn. Because I was so inspired with that character from the movie. And before that, I had a couple other handles that should remain mysterious now, simply because it was, I had done all kinds of things, and perhaps some of them were not the most super. It was a long time ago, many decades ago, in a galaxy far away in the Middle East, here in Israel. So that was kind of my story. I was very naturally curious, but then I had that lucky inspirational moment, seeing a Hollywood movie and seeing a character that I resonated with, a young woman, a young, fierce, dynamic, powerful woman, portrayed by Angelina Jolie, the hacker Acid Burn, that really captured my imagination. And I said, okay, this is who I am. And this is the world that I'm going to live in. And there are hackers all over the world, according to the movie. And I can find them and I can hack the planet. So that was my inspiration. That's how I got into this. And I was very lucky to be able to follow that Hollywood story and make that a reality in some ways.
And Keren, how did we go from this part to actually going, aha, I want to actually do this as a career? This is one thing to say I could be this resonates with me, but how did you know that this would actually mean financial benefits, or I want to do this as a job?
That's a great question. So to be honest, there's another Hollywood movie here. I'll mention it in a second. But I also think I was very lucky and privileged to grow up in Tel Aviv, to grow up in Israel, a country where access to technological education at a young age is quite universal. And at my school, we had a computer lab, we had a robotics lab, we had computer classes. And it was something that I could just choose to do, even without thinking, is this a job for my future? It was just one of the options. Like my friends went to art class, and another friend took, I guess, advanced French or something like that. I had the option to take computer classes. And it was funny because at some point I'm not going to say I taught the teachers. Okay, that would be a little bit much. But there were definitely a point where I felt what they were teaching us in the school's computer class was kind of behind what I could learn online myself. And I think that's another part of the hacker mindset, the self-learning, the self-exploration. And just as I finished high school, I had 1 year off before my military service. So that's a really big part of my upbringing here in Israel, that there is a mandatory military service or national service for men and women at age 18. And I had a couple of months, almost a year before it was my time to join the army. So I was told by my family, it's time to get a job. You can't just slack off. Of course, for the first couple of weeks, I was just slacking off as any high schooler. But then I went to the local mall and I took a look at all the stores, and there was a computer store, and they also sold video games and computer games, which was just perfect for me. So I just marched in and I said, "You need to hire me." And they said, "Why?" And then I explained to them why I think I could bring something of value, because they didn't have anybody managing their actually their video game, their computer game department.
Yeah.
So they brought me on. I was their youngest employee for a couple of months. And at that store, I met hackers. And it was my first paid job in the real world. I mean, not like babysitting job or other.
Yeah, exactly.
Job.
Yeah.
It was my working at the retail computer store. And I remember one day a group of kids came in, young kids, about my age, like teenagers. And they were asking for jumpers. I don't know if you call them jumpers in English.
Like jump cables.
Not jump cables, no, little tiny. So these are little tiny plastic heads that you put on the motherboard, on the CPU to actually overclock the CPU. At least in the 90s, that's what they used to do. And this was not considered a legit act by the company that makes the CPU or the computer. But if you could do that, if you could fiddle with the motherboard and you add some jumpers in the right places and you weld them in, or you just stuck them in, you could actually get the CPU to run at faster clock speeds than it's supposed. So that's called overclocking your CPU. So a couple of kids, they came to the store and they were looking for these items for their motherboards. And I was like really curious about this practice, this hardware hacking practice I never heard of. And I said, what is it? What are you doing? And they said, follow me if you want to learn. And I followed them. I started hanging out with these hardware hacker kids. And that was, a moment where I was working in the store, but these kids came in, like my job and the hobby collided. And I realized this could be something that I can be doing for a while. And then I saw the movie Sneakers.
Oh, I love Sneakers. That's my all-time favorite.
Yeah. For a lot of security professionals, it is.
Yeah.
And in Sneakers, I really got that message that you could do a security assessment, basically hack, behave just like the hackers, the malicious hackers, the criminals would, but then you tell the company how you did it, and then you get paid.
Not very much. If you remember, that was a line from the movie. It's not a very good
profession. Right? Yeah. After they steal like a lot of money from the bank, they have to give it back, and then they get a much smaller
paycheck. Exactly.
If you haven't seen Sneakers, podcast listeners, you got to watch Hackers, you got to watch Sneakers. Watch these two movies.
Love Sneakers.
There's an entire generation of security professionals, probably several generations of security professionals that grew up on these movies. And of course, I know for a lot of Americans, it was also War Games, which came out earlier.
Yeah.
For me, it was this combination of Hackers, Sneakers, and then maybe 3 years later, The Matrix.
Yeah.
In between those, there was also The Net with Sandra Bullock, which was a little bit cringy. But again, from the representation point of view, for me, seeing groups of hackers, groups of people, or women that were part of the cybersecurity world was really meaningful. Because I was super inspired and impressed by these Hollywood movies. And to me, they told a true story. Right? That's what I saw. That's what I believed. And then came my time to join the Israeli military. So after having fun at the computer store and going to my first hacker camp with these hacker kids and learning about overclocking, it was my day to join the army. And there's the first day you come in and they take your photo, they give you tetanus shots, they give you ill-fitting uniform and boots. And then they put me in a small room with this officer who had all of these files, like lots and lots and lots of 18-year-old kids who were going through the system. And he looked at me for about 10 seconds and he said, okay, Keren, what's your story? And I said, I'm a hacker and I want to be a hacker for the army if you let me. And it somehow worked, which was really lucky and miraculous and wonderful, because this was more than 20 years ago. I'm talking about late 90s, early noughties. And not a lot of people knew what hacking is. Nobody called it cybersecurity. And the fact that this officer kind of had an idea what I was talking about. And instead of kind of saying, okay, well, you go off to make coffee somewhere or work on a typewriter somewhere, or even man a radar station or any of the other many jobs that they could have sent me, he did send me to a security communications unit where I learned a lot about the different aspects of this world, which I had never imagined as a curious hacker on the internet. Learning about how a military's network works and the different types of radio communications and other types of technologies that are used. It's a vast different universe to, just IP and the World Wide Web and the things I knew from my PC hacking at home. So that was a really, really crucial moment in my life. It wasn't just about making this a career. It was about I think for me, cultivating maybe a moral compass or an understanding that cybersecurity is not just a fun hobby. It's not just about the internet and making, fun things and internet forums. It's actually about our way of life. It's about securing the systems that we rely on, securing the systems that my country relies on. That's what I learned during my military service.
And were you more on the defensive side or on the offensive side? What was like the thing that you guys were doing the most?
So officially, the unit was dealing with defensive technologies and with identifying problems and the communication security for the military. But even back then, we didn't have that blue team, red team definition. It was a defensive unit.
Yeah.
But I had the red team mentality. I just didn't know that's what it was called. I was the one who was, sitting in a boardroom, oftentimes with mostly men at different ages around the table. I would oftentimes be the most female and the most young person at the table. And I'd be the one to, take a look at something, a network architecture or technology that we were praising and say, well, wait a minute. What if a malicious outsider used this to do that? And nobody had thought about that, at least nobody in that room. And that was part of my journey. Is I learned that this perspective is valuable and that even a traditionally conservative organization that's very defense oriented can benefit from that outsider perspective.
Of course.
And that there is a place for that.
Hey, and in your TED Talk, you talk about like hackers as this super important thing. And frankly, I think you mention it as the immune system of the information age. Maybe we could dive a bit deeper into what you meant by that definition.
Absolutely. So I was inspired to use that analogy of the immune system by the fact that just like our biological immune system, hackers around the world are not all one. They're not all one organ, one process, one type of microorganism, or one chemical identity. There's all these different types of hackers around the world. But just like the friendly bacteria that are part of our immune system, friendly hackers work to identify vulnerabilities, even if they're uncoordinated. They find those vulnerabilities and they raise them up to the level of our attention. In some cases, even by exploiting them. But in many cases, and this is what I was hoping to highlight in my TED Talk, friendly hackers are the only ones that show the world where we rely on outdated, unsecure technology. And they're the ones who encourage us to demand something better. So that was the reason I went with the immune system analogy. And I found the TED platform to be the right place for that, which surprised me. I was easily the most anonymous person on that stage that year in more than one way. And I felt that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to share my message on a global platform and to showcase that hackers play a really important role and that we actually need hackers in our life. And yes, of course, there are many malicious hackers out there, but the activity, the mindset of a hacker is one that I think leads us to innovation, to evolution, forces us to evolve. And I think it's positive and it's it makes the world more interesting.
Hey, but let's actually talk about this. I totally agree, but let's be honest, not everyone does. And there's very often this thing like, no, you're not actually helping us fix this. Why do you need to wait before you give us results? Why can't you just help us fix it? So there is a sort of antipathy, if you will, between hackers and the establishment. So how can we improve this? How can we reduce the antipathy, improve it for collaborate?
So one of the things I've learned firsthand is that building trust and building relationships is not easy. And it's a lot easier to break trust and to destroy a relationship, which is why I always encourage both the security researchers and the individual hackers that I'm in touch with or that reach out to me, and the organizations, corporates or government agencies or whatever type company. I always encourage them to spend time on building relationships, building bridges, being present, being active and engaged with the other side before there is a vulnerability or an exploit or a crisis that needs to be handled. And this is why I started B-Sides in Tel Aviv, because I felt that in Israel, we have a fantastic growing cybersecurity ecosystem. We have 700 cybersecurity startups. At least that's the latest number that I heard at Tel Aviv Cyber Week. That was the big headlines. We have a ton of security companies. But what about the community of security researchers, of individuals? So we started B-Sides in Tel Aviv, and it's part of the global security B-Sides movement. If the people on today's podcast have never been to a B-Sides event, I recommend you check out securitybsides.org. Look at the map. There are events all over the world, and of course, virtually. This is a great use, I think, of a company's time or a friendly hacker's time to spend 1 day a year, maybe 2 days a year, participating in the event for their community and building bridges, making relationships, contributing to research, sharing research, not because there's a bug bounty or because they want to get famous, but because they have something to share, something to teach. And the same goes for the corporate side. Participating there, not because you want to sell your product, but because you want to know these people. Maybe you want to hire these people to be part of your group or your team. So that's the reason we started B-Sides in Tel Aviv. It's the only conference that has its own fans. I got one for you, Jaya. I'll send it to you. And you're, of course, welcome to participate next year and visit us here in beautiful, sunny Tel Aviv.
I'm taking you up on that now. We're sealing the deal. Let me ask you, you mentioned bug bounties, and I think that's actually a brilliant segue to ask my next question, which is like, we talk about bug bounties as like this financial incentive to get stuff reported and to compensate the ethical hackers, the good guys, for doing the right thing and reporting it to these companies instead of abusing the security vulnerability that they may have found. What other types of incentives should we be looking at? How could we further engage? Because not every company has a bug bounty. Some of them don't even have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure process or have no idea what to do. So how do we make this better?
So I absolutely recommend learning more about bug bounty programs. For those who are listening or learning about that for the first time, of course, check out the episode with Katie Masouris, who was the pioneer of bug bounties, and also one of the authors for the ISO. There is an international standard for coordinated vulnerability disclosure. But even without VDPs, vulnerability disclosure programs, or bug bounty programs, there are ways to engage with a security research community. And it doesn't have to be monetary incentives. So, one thing which I find is really cool are challenge coins. This is a challenge coin that I got from the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We had a challenge coin for B-Sides Tel Aviv. There are a lot of programs out there that instead of money will actually give out challenge coins. And one of the most famous ones, I think, is Tesla. And that's, an exciting company that certainly can't afford to pay researchers, and they do. But they also have their challenge coins that only go to the top researchers that identify vulnerabilities in Tesla's products. And these have created, an aura of eligibility out of nothing. The fact that these coins, I couldn't use them to buy anything in the store, but there's only a few people that have them. They're like medals. They're a badge of honor. And in similar ways, other companies, I think even Katie has done this once, other companies do different things like hosting a VIP bug hunter only party, or sharing access to a new piece of code or a new technology before it's available for the general audience. And generally just listening, being active, participating in a conversation, participating in events like Security B-Sides around the world, contributing to the community, participating in things organized by the Electronic Frontier Foundation and DEF CON. By the way, this is from, I don't know if it's my first DEF CON, but it's one of my first DEF CONs from
18.
More than, I think it's 10 years ago or 12 years ago. This year was 29. So a long time ago.
I have one from DEF CON 14, which is it's an age test.
That's really cool. I remember growing up and reading about DEF CON in Wired magazine and learning about it from some of my other hacker friends. When we had our first hacker event in Tel Aviv in the year 2000, the organizer said that she was inspired by things like the Chaos Computer Congress and DEF CON and Hackers of Planet Earth and all of these conferences. And it was always kind of a goal of mine to get to visit and participate in person. And I'm glad that I was able to make the pilgrimage from Israel to Las Vegas. But it's important to know that you don't have to travel anywhere to participate in security research events and hacker conferences. There are many of them available virtually and locally, wherever you might be in the world.
So let's talk about that for a second, because, the working part as a researcher has been a huge part of your career. What's been like the fundamental or main areas of research? Can you talk to us about a bit of your favorite project?
So one of my favorite projects that I did at Tel Aviv University was around 2015 about bug bounty programs. And my goal was to prove that the motivation for bug bounty participants is not just monetary. It's not just about the dollar amount of the cash that they might get from a bug bounty program. Mm-hmm. And at the time, we were able to show that there are many hackers that participate because they're curious, because they find it makes them feel good to do the right thing, or because they really like being part of an exclusive group. So receiving things, even like a t-shirt or a challenge coin or some other type of exclusive swag, was a good enough motivation for a lot of researchers. So that was a piece of work, a research I did 6 years ago. It's a long time, around 2015 at Tel Aviv University. Other than that, on the technical side, I actually spent some years working on PKI, public key infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And I was a really, really big believer that we're going to have cryptography solve all of our problems. And we're going to use PKI to authenticate, to encrypt our emails, and everything would be you repudiate, like you couldn't repudiate a transaction or a conversation that you had, because everything would be digitally signed with your digital certificate. And I am as big as a believer as I was in that. Mm-hmm. The cryptography was sound, the technology was pretty much there. The adoption and bringing that into organizations just didn't really carry it forward. Yeah. So today, one of the things I'm researching and that I'm passionate about is a passwordless future.
Oh, you and me both. Yeah.
Passwords belong in our past.
Yes.
That we need better technologies out there. So I'm looking at a few of the alternative technologies that are in this space, different types of tools for authentication, whether it's biometrics or phone apps. There's a whole bunch of different things that are happening in this space. And I've advised a couple of companies and organizations on that front. I'm really curious, and I'm very hopeful that we can see a future that has better forms of authentication, because we deserve better.
So digital identity is definitely the cornerstone of having a good security program, but it's also like the basis for being able to protect your security online. What do you think are the foundational aspects for us to have like a new identity on the internet, and to be able to have that combined with security, but also maybe a certain degree of privacy? How would you go about that?
So I think that right now, certainly after the past 18 months, the changes of COVID-19, identity has become the new perimeter. It's the new boundary, because people are working from wherever, from the office, from their phone, and each day we each use dozens of different applications. In some cases, some people use more than 40 different logins or credentials, pairs of credentials, a username and a password for different services. That's not something that I think is manageable on the human level, which is why most people recycle their passwords. And that's the bad type of recycling. So the first step is to stop recycling your passwords. Have unique passwords. Better yet, have passphrases. So make the passwords longer. And actually, some research has found that passphrases are easier for you to remember, but they are harder for a computer program or a malicious attacker to guess, because they are longer, which is actually what counts. The whole thing about complexity, uppercase and lowercase and numbers and symbols, according to even the person who came up with that, the research is outdated. The paper that standard is based on is from 2005, I think. So the person behind that complexity recommendation for passwords from NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology in the US, he has come out and said that's no longer really a good recommendation. So think about passphrases. Certainly, wherever you can, adopt multi-factor authentication, wherever that's a possibility for you on your social networks, on your mobile devices with different applications. And don't recycle your passwords. And just start thinking about your digital identity as an expansion of your physical identity, because that's what it is. It's part of you, right? And you wouldn't just give anybody pieces of you just like that. And you wouldn't necessarily let's say we all use masks nowadays because of COVID-19. You wouldn't recycle a COVID mask, right? So don't recycle your password. Try and treat that like the basic hygiene that you do for yourself. Try and treat your digital passwords in a similar way. So those would be my recommendations.
I think they're excellent. And by the way, I've been trying to convince, most of my male acquaintances for years that size matters. So I'm happy you agree on this one. So with all of the, you mentioned the COVID, since COVID, I think, we've seen so many attacks as well during COVID. I mean, we've seen a ridiculous rise in all different types of hacks, whether that's been cyber criminal propagated or state-sponsored attacks. We've just seen a really gloomy epic in our past in terms of big security fails. What do you think we need to do in order to have a rosier future in terms of the current state of hacking?
That's a fantastic question, because I like to believe that I am a techno-optimist at heart. So while I grew up with cyberpunk movies and books, imagining a dystopian technological future, I like to believe that technology in the big picture has actually helped us in many ways. And in the past 2 years, technology has allowed us to not just survive, but thrive throughout unprecedented conditions that humans have never had to deal with on this scale, definitely on this global scale. At the same time, the bad guys, criminals, nation state attackers, they have not spared a second. They never let a good crisis go to waste. So they actually took this crisis as an opportunity to double down, to evolve their attacks, to come up with new techniques. Ransomware is having and has had, its biggest paydays of ever. So I think we should not waste the opportunity as well. We should not waste the opportunity to learn from what the criminals have been doing, the malicious hackers have been doing, how nation state actors have been using different tools, different tactics, because they are constantly moving. And from a security perspective, if we want a rosier future, we can't do what we did 5 years ago. We can't do what we did in the BC, the before COVID age, right? It's time to look towards the future. And from my perspective, a really big part of that is learning, studying the adversaries, understanding their tactics, their motivations, the way that they go after an organization, their attack vectors, and also just from the technology perspective, understanding that it's no longer just about 0 days, never before seen exploits and vulnerabilities. It's a lot of the times also about the basic vulnerabilities that have existed and do exist in technology stacks that we all rely on, including within supply chains. And I know this is something you've also discussed in the podcast. So it's not just about the next shiny new vulnerability, new zero-day exploit. It's just about taking stock. What do we rely on in our company, in our daily lives? Even as individuals, we have to become the chief information security officers for our digital lives. We've all had to bring into our homes all of these digital devices to help us stay connected. Now it's time to take care of them, right? Nobody else is going to do that. Yeah. So it's time to take stock, to take responsibility, and recognize this is the technology stack. This is what we rely on. Where can we update? Where can we bring in something better? Where can we authenticate in a more sophisticated or secure way? How can we build the stack based on what we have existing? I'm not saying throw everything out the window. Based on what we have, how can we build it securely? So looking towards the future, not doing what we did 5 years ago.
I think this is excellent advice, and I think we should all be learning from our past. And in that vein, you mentioned that you were inspired by Angelina Jolie. So I know that a lot of women are inspired by you. What would be your advice, looking back on your career? What would you have done differently based on the things that you learned? And what would you advise those other women to do?
Wow. The first thing I want to tell everyone, women and men, anybody in between, you belong in this world. You can't let anybody tell you otherwise or make you feel otherwise. This is a community that needs all the help it can get. Whether you are younger, older, you are non-binary, whatever, you're a robot, you belong in this ecosystem, and it needs you. And specifically for the younger women out there, know that you have worth, that you're valuable, your perspective matters. And you don't have to have a classic hacker background or a classic computer science degree from the best university in the world. There are so many pathways into the cybersecurity world, so many jobs, so many companies and organizations that need all the help they can get, and they're looking for you. All you need is the curiosity and the drive to learn by yourself and catch things, absorb things, identify things, notice things, and the willingness to be part of this world. And I want to, if I could travel back in time and say this to myself, because I'll never forget going to my first hacker event with those hacker kids I met at the computer store. And it was 348 guys and the woman who organized it and me. And that one woman organizer, the fact that she was there made a difference for me, because I saw her and I realized there's a chance I can belong in this room, in this, but it's a very daunting sight for any 18-year-old girl to come to a professional conference and only see men. That's really daunting. Yeah. And part of the reason I really want to emphasize that there are so many pathways into this world, it's also something that I shared together with 8 other fantastic women in this book, the Women in Tech book, which we did as it was a community project. It was supported by Kickstarter. It's not something that makes anybody rich, but rather the idea was to provide our stories and different stories from different women with different backgrounds into the technology world, into the security ecosystem, my hacker path. And this is what I want to share with everybody out there. And if you're a young woman in cybersecurity, young or mid-aged or any age, in cybersecurity, you belong. And I want to welcome you to our global network, the Leading Cyber Ladies, which Jaya has kindly spoken at one of our events, one of our chapter events earlier in 2021. So this is a global organization, and we have chapters in Israel, in New York City, in Toronto, in the UK, in Europe, and in Tokyo. A new chapter.
Oh,
yes, just born in Tokyo, in Japan. But we are looking for more ladies who want to join our network. The idea is just to help one another, to network, to share our knowledge, to share ideas, and through representation, change the ecosystem of cybersecurity so that it's more diverse and inclusive for everyone.
And I think that is fantastic. That we need that, let's be honest. If I could ask you one final question, and that's really about looking towards the future, what is up in the next couple of months, weeks, years for you? What are your major goals where you want to rally cry? I mean, I think this one's already great, by the way, let's be honest. Getting women together and empowering them and helping them find their voice, that's awesome. But what else is there? What are you focused?
Thank you, Jaya. So firstly, I have to say I'm very passionate about the security community. And other than my academic and professional work, I spend about 30% of my time dedicated to B-Sides Tel Aviv and to the Leading Cyber Ladies. And if there are people on today's podcast listening, you have any spare time, give back to your community, whether it's through DEF CON groups or a B-Sides event or a Cyber Ladies meetup or any other way that you feel like you can give back. I think this year, it's hard to say, but 2 years have been challenging for so many people in so many aspects. If you have the power to help someone somehow, digitally, remotely, in person, help someone. That would be my rallying cry. And I can tell you what I'm working on. I'm working on my research on a passwordless future, maybe coming up with a new book, writing some academic and popular media articles, as I'm always working on these things. And I might also be working on a very interesting media project, but that's undercover for now.
That sounds wonderful and super exciting. Keren, I want to thank you again for joining us today on our final episode of this series. For this chapter, I hope you enjoyed it. I always love talking to you. You're super inspirational. Please keep going on. And I loved the last message as well, paying it forward. We all need to do that in order to make sure we have a sustainable future ahead. And to everybody else, I hope you enjoyed the first season of the Avast Hacker Archives. We covered everything from hardware hacking to data breaches, encryption, ethical hackers, and so much more. And we're incredibly grateful for all the amazing folks that have joined us in the past 10 episodes. And we hope to continue with another series with more amazing folks. So stay tuned. Thank you.